cinema session, and firstly, on behalf of all JRAAS, I'd like to thank you for your presence, for being here with us. As you were able to see from our poster, we'll be presenting Midnight in Paris with a special commentary by Professor Azevedo from the Faculty of Arts. And now, addressing our speaker, Azevedo is Professor of American Literature at the Faculty of Arts, University of Porto, where he created the American Studies program. His doctoral thesis was on Ernest Hemingway, and he has published several articles on this writer's work, both in Portugal and in the USA. His main research interests cover 19th, 20th, and 21st century narrative fiction. He has also published, among others, on Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, F. Scott Fitzgerald, William Faulkner, John Dos Passos, Ralph Ellison, Raymond Carver, Paul Auster, Don DeLillo, Cormac McCarthy, Philip Roth, and Flannery O'Connor. He was on the board of the European Association for American Studies and is currently head of the Department of American Studies, Faculty of Arts, University of Porto. So as you can see from this short but rather enlightening bio note, we are in extremely good hands, I'm sure. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for your presence. We, as JRAAS, who organize monthly cinema sessions and monthly seminars. Should you wish to know more, please consult our social media. And without further ado, I give the stage to Professor Azevedo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for this invitation. I'm pleased to be here. And I'd like to congratulate you for these sessions, for this cycle of cinema focused on the city. What I plan to do today is to talk about a little bit about the city, about modernism, about Paris, of course, and a few remarks on the film. And then at the end, we may have your response to the film and what I'm going to say. I think I understand now. Okay. So, city, modernism, Paris, Midnight in Paris. Starting with the cities. The first thing I'd like to say is that there's always been a close association between literature and the cities. In the cities, we have the essential literary institutions. We have publishers, patrons, libraries, museums, bookshops, theaters, and magazines. And in the cities, we have the intensities of cultural friction and the frontiers of experience. The pressures, the novelties, the debates, the leisure, the money, the noise of many languages, the vivid trade in ideas and styles, the chance for artistic specialization. Curiously enough, writers and intellectuals have long abhorred the city. The dream of escape from its vice, its immediacy, its sprawl, its pace. Its very model of man has been the basis of a profound cultural descent, evident in a specific literary mode, the so-called pastoral, which can be a critic of the city or a transcendence of it. Yet, writers and intellectuals have, after all, constantly gone to the city as on some essential quest into art, into experience, modern history, and the fullest realization of their artistic potential. The pull and push of the city, its attraction and repulsion, have provided themes that run deep in literature and film, where the city becomes metaphor rather than place. In many respects, the literature of experimental modernism, which emerged in the last years of the 19th century and developed into the 20th century, modernism was an art of cities. Especially the cities, which, for various historical reasons, had acquired high activity and great reputation as centers of intellectual and cultural exchange. And in these culture capitals, a fervent atmosphere of new thought and new arts developed, drawing in not only young native writers and would-be writers, but artists and exiles from other countries as well. In these cities, with their cafes, cabarets, magazines, publishers, and galleries, the new aesthetics were distilled. Generations argued and movements contested. The new causes and forms became matters of struggle and campaign. Such cities were more than accidental meeting places and crossing points. They were generative environments of the new arts, focal points of intellectual community, of intellectual conflict and tension. They were mostly cities with a well-established humanistic role, traditional, cultural and artistic centers. They were places of art, learning and ideas. But they were also often novel environments, carrying within themselves the complexity and tension of modern metropolitan life, which so deeply underlies modern consciousness and modern writing. If modernism is a particularly urban art, that is partly because the modern artist, like his fellow man, has been caught up in the spirit of the modern city, which is itself the spirit of a modern technological society. The modern city has appropriated most of the functions and communications of society, most of its population, and the furthest extremities of its technological, commercial, industrial, and intellectual experience. The city has become culture. One of the more striking features of modernism is its wide geographical spread, its multiple nationality. Modernism found its natural habitat in cities. And when we think of the geography of modernism, we cannot avoid thinking of these urban climates and the ideas and campaigns, the new philosophies and politics that ran through them. Through Berlin, Vienna, Moscow, St. Petersburg, around the turn of the century and into the early years of the war, through London in the years immediately before the war, through Zurich, New York and Chicago during the war, and through Paris at all times. Gertrude Stein, who hosted a Paris salon where the leading figures of modernism in literature and art would meet, Picasso, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Sinclair Lewis, Ezra Pound, Henri Matisse. Stein said the appropriate phrase: writers have to have two countries, the one where they belong and the one in which they live really. And she added, America is my country and Paris is my hometown. We are going to see this in the film. And by the way, the film's protagonist, Gil Pender, a dissatisfied Hollywood screenwriter, and I'll say more about this in a few minutes, he makes the necessary pilgrimage to Gertrude Stein, as aspiring writers did. Stein graciously agrees to read his manuscript. The protagonist tries to reinvigorate his youthful dreams of literary glory. He travels back in time. The time travel conceit is managed adequately in the film. So, as I was saying, it travels back in time to a non-stop cultural party where he encounters Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Cole Porter, and falls in love with Picasso's missus. I'm not going to list every cultural era he runs into, because it's a remarkably comprehensive catalogue that you will see in the film. Anyway, a catalogue of the varieties of modernism percolating in Paris between the wars. But I'd like to mention William Faulkner. He does not appear in the film as Hemingway and Faulkner do, but his words are there. At a certain point, the protagonist says, "The past is not dead. Actually, it's not even past." Faulkner's literary rights argued this amounted to copyright. Because Faulkner, in Requiem for a Nun, famously wrote, "The past is never there. It's not even past." They claimed that the producers did not seek permission to use Faulkner's line. Besides, they claimed that the makers of the film misquoted this famous line. Anyway, the film was cleared of copyright infringement. Back to Paris and to Gertrude Stein. Paris is surely, for modernism and American writers of the 1920s, the outright dominant center, as the fount of Bohemia, tolerance, and emigre lifestyle. Gertrude Stein, moving from the USA to Paris in 1903, and then 20 years later, becoming the great point of influence for a succeeding generation, including a whole generation of young American writers of experimental disposition. In a state of economic and moral collapse following the war, Paris maintained the climate, the cultural institutions which young writers needed. Paris became the ideal cosmopolitan city, cultured, tolerant, feverish, and active, radical but contained. Gertrude Stein, Picasso, the Fitzgeralds, and other writers and artists. Well, these are people Woody Allen knew from high school, as he himself admits in an interview. That's where he first met them, so he says, in his peculiar style. And he also knew them, fictionally at least, in a 20s memory. A 20s memory is a short story that he wrote, and that appeared in 1971 in his book, Getting Even. I think the Portuguese translation for this is Para acabar de vez com a cultura. Okay. So, a short story that appeared in Getting Even, after originally running under the title How I Became a Comedian in the Chicago Daily News. All of those characters in the story and some of the settings resurfaced 40 years later in Midnight in Paris. Though fortunately for the actor, Owen Wilson, fortunately for him, the film does not include a running motive in the short story in which, I quote, "We laughed a lot and had fun, and then we put on some boxing gloves and I broke my nose." On the other hand, Owen Wilson famously broke his nose as a teenager, so maybe that helped him get the part. The story also includes a cast of characters who don't appear in Midnight in Paris, the artists Joan Rie and bullfighter Manolete among them. And its events certainly differ from the film. Anyway, Woody Allen's first step at midnight in Paris was precisely this 1971 short story. Midnight in Paris is a slight comedy with a fantasy nostalgic theme. Owen Wilson takes the proxy Woody Allen role, this is very common in Woody Allen films, as a girl who is at work, since I'm talking about nostalgia, who is at work on a novel about a guy who owns a nostalgia shop, whatever that means. Another classic Woody Allen type, the know-it-all pseudo-intellectual, is Paul Bates, as we see in the film. If Paul ever met T.S. Eliot, you'd certainly suggest revised footnotes for the wasteland. Gil, on the other hand, cries out, "Proof rock," another reference to Eliot. "Proof rock is my mantra." Proof rock is a statement of that feeling of being bored that afflicts Gil. But we must also keep in mind that Cole Porter is Gil's alter ego. A shared love of Porter's music allows Gil to forge a connection in the present and considerably in the future with a Parisian woman. This is a sign that his fetishizing of bygone days has been based on a mistake. A 20th memory, the short story, is, as I said, is not a midnight in Paris. And in a way, with its repeated scenes of broken noses, the story also touches on the same thing the film does. That while nostalgia for a past time is undeniably alluring, it's also a bit misleading. Woody Allen said in an interview, "We have one conception of things from the past. And certainly in my movie, that's what I wanted to trade on. But I'm sure, if you are sitting in a restaurant with Salvador Dali and Louis Buñuel, they spoke very differently from what you would imagine." Paris is perpetually alive. Not because it houses the ghosts of the famous dead, but because it is the repository and the setting of so much of their work. And the purpose of all that old stuff is not to carry us into the past, but rather to animate and enliven the present. To open the story, Woody Allen uses a total of 60 shots with a classic French song, Si tu vois ma mère, as background music to show the beauty of Paris from day to night. An analogy could be established with the opening scenes of Manhattan. The color temperature of the whole image is changed in a warm yellow combined with areas of green, displaying a sense of typical romantic nostalgia in France. The images set a relaxing and romantic tone for the whole story. There is a conversation between the protagonist and his fiancée, and there is most evidently this disconnection between the two characters' values. And this gives the viewers an insight of what might happen to their engagement at the end of the story. Right after Bill talks about how drop dead gorgeous Paris is in the brain, the artists, the writers, he says this, and the fiancée Inez doesn't understand what is so great about rain, what is good about getting wet. By bringing up the conflict between Gil and Inez, the conflict between dream and reality also hit up along the way. Woody Allen portrait of Gill's characteristic as a successful screenwriter for popular Hollywood movies who dreams to live in the 20s and wishes to have a serious time writing his own novel, provides the audience a link to one of the most famous writers in 1920s, Scott Fitzgerald. Both of them share the story of a writer who has a lovely but, to put it mildly, crazy wife, and who is forced to waste their talent in producing popular readings in order to provide his wife a luxurious life. The parallel stories foreshadow that Gill might have the same sad ending as Scott Fitzgerald did. Throughout the movie, the settings and costumes leave hints to the audience of which period of the time the story is happening. When Gill first travels through time to the 1920s, the yellow car is an iconic symbol of the famous representation of the 20s artwork. And here I'm thinking of Gatsby's car, Gatsby's yellow car in The Great Gatsby. After arriving to the party, the Art Deco style of the room, women dressing like flappers, and the music in the background all serve the purpose of recreating a world in 1920s. The famous characters that Gill meets during his adventures all have distinctive details to help audience differentiate each of them. Zelda Fitzgerald has blonde, short, curly hair and always has a glass of liquor in her hand, obviously. Hemingway doesn't shave and dresses much more casual than the other artists. Darby has his crazy moustache and iconic skull cane. After the third time, Gill goes back to the 20s. He accidentally travels to the 1870s. Similar with the first two times he travels, this time it also starts with some kind of transportation. However, this time it's a coupe, identical with most common transportation people used back in La Belle Époque. At the same time, the way people dress also have a dramatic change. As the storyline of the movie takes form, Woody Allen uses all the resources and strategies to create an adventure across the present and the past, which in the end lead to the future. All the music, costumes, languages, and settings contribute to achieve one goal: establishing the illusion of bringing what is on screen, establishing the illusion of bringing what is on screen into the reality. And the final scene is revealing the protagonist is no longer thinking of living in the past, but he's heading towards the future. I think we'd better see the film now, and then we might discuss some other details you'd like to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for a wonderful introduction.